Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran
Hey, everyone.
and Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
Okay, so let's start things out with what we've been doing. I don't know. I haven't been doing many things this week. I do this thing. I like to say I do it every year, but I think I do it like every 2 years or so. My email box gets so full. Like my morning is like for like an hour. It's just going through my email box, deleting emails, and getting through all the junk. And I'm sure a lot of you guys also experience that. And every year or so, I like to do this thing where I call it unsubscribe week. And it's where I go through every day and I vigilantly go to every email. And if it's not like a complete spam thing, I will, if it's like part of a newsletter or something like that I don't want, on the very bottom of the email, it'll have like an unsubscribe link. And I will do that for all those. And usually after that week, for like months and months, my email box is so much more tolerable. So I highly recommend this for everybody. But I've been doing that this week, and it's also it makes you feel good to like know that you're throwing all these things that you don't want in your email box away. But I also went to Disneyland this past week, and when I first went to Galaxy's Edge, the first day it opened, actually, I built myself a lightsaber. We recorded that video, released it online. That video now has I think almost 1 million views, like 750,000 views or something insane. It's one of the most watched Galaxy's Edge videos online. And everybody watching it, because I do this channel, Ordinary Adventures, with Kitra, my girlfriend, they're like, why didn't Kitra build a lightsaber? And the truth of the matter was that she had no interest. She thought it was kind of like a guy's thing, and she wanted to build a droid and whatever. So she just had no interest in building a lightsaber, but then she videotaped me doing it, and it's such an emotional experience that people have been asking on our channel, like, will Kitra build a lightsaber? And she actually decided that it was time to do so. So we went to Galaxy's Edge, and she built herself a lightsaber. That video is not online yet, but I will say that she cried multiple times during it. So look out for that. And also I've been getting recognized a whole lot for this channel, Ordinary Adventures, which is a lot different than getting recognized for Slash Film. Slash Film usually happens at conventions or movie theaters. This happens, theme parks, but also like everyday life. Like I was at a junket on Saturday, and for The Mandalorian, which I'll talk about later in this podcast, and I got in my Uber car, and the Uber driver, like, looked in the mirror and looked back at me, and he was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I'm like, what? And he was like, you're Peter from Ordinary Adventures. He, like, freaked out. Watches the channel. On Sunday, Kitra and I were shopping in Target, and a guy overheard us talking in another aisle. He worked there. And he came over, him and his daughter watched the channel, every video all the time. And he had us record a video on his phone to send to his daughter. And his daughter, replied back on Twitter. It was, so sweet. I don't know. It's just, I'm not saying that you do the work for these kind of things, because this is obviously not why we just started this channel and doing this channel. But it's just so cool to have all these interactions and this kind of to see people are loving it and are developing a connection with us, and I'm just so humbled by it, because it's also a lot different than the Slash Film audience, which tends to be a lot of late 20s, early 30s white males. This is a lot of little kids taking photos with us, and it's just so strange, weird, cool. I just I don't know. I've been just so humbled by it. But yeah. So, anyways, I haven't been doing much this week, but I just thought I'd mention that on this podcast. Jacob, you have had a hell of a week. You were covering a big event in Colorado. What did you do? How can we sum this up?
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with this. WB, Warner Brothers, flew out a whole bunch of people, a number of film press, but also a number of social media influencers, strangely enough, to Estes Park, Colorado, for a 4-day-long Doctor Sleep event, which is, the new Mike Flanagan directed film, the sequel to The Shining, based on Stephen King's novel. And I will not be reviewing Dr. Sleep. Chris will do it for us, because I was pretty much pampered for 4 days on this trip. But I did get a chance to interview talent involved and essentially have a big Colorado adventure. So, Peter, should I start with the haunted room?
Wait, haunted? Oh, you got to stay in a haunted room?
Yes. So, the first night I was there was a mishap with the booking of my regular rooms. They said, "Do you want to stay in one of the haunted rooms?" And this is the Stanley Hotel. It's located at the foot of the Rocky Mountains.
Do you actually think this was a mishap, or do you think this was planned?
I'm not sure. I really don't know. But the Stanley Hotel is literally an old mansion that was turned into a hotel. And the 70s is where Stephen King stayed when he thought up The Shining. So this is where The Shining was born. You walk all over this. You walk all over this town. There's Shining stuff everywhere. The gift shops all have Shining stuff next to all the usual Colorado knickknacks. So it's incredibly unusual. And the Stanley Hotel is a famously haunted place. It's all kinds of ghost stories associated with it. The 4th floor has tons of famously haunted rooms. And I was put in the room 428, which is called the Cowboy Room, because it is where a bunch of people with tuberculosis were put on their last days, and a local rancher would look after them. And according to legend, you can still hear the voices and see the faces of the people who are dying in this room. And you wake up at night and see the cowboy sitting by your bed, watching over you as if you were one of his patients. And I did not see this. I did not see any cowboys. I did not see any faces. However, I did hear the ghost tour stop by my room several times and heard the entire story through the door. And I really, and I wear cowboy boots, and I regret not opening the door and putting my foot out. I regret it.
Oh,
so
you should
much.
have done that. Wait, were you hoping to hear anything? Were you hoping to experience anything?
Oh, so much so. I've written about this in the past, so you can find it on my Twitter page. I re-upped it. But I wrote about my paranormal experience in the past. I have encountered something that I'm pretty sure was a ghost. So even though I'm a skeptic by nature, I believe there are ghosts out there in some capacity. So I was hoping for another experience. And at first I was disappointed because I woke up the next morning, and I woke up repeatedly throughout the night, but did not see any ghosts. And we went on a ghost tour the next day. This is after I moved out of my room to a non-haunted room. And I was talking to my ghost tour guide, and she was very, very history-based. She did not bullshit us. She kind of threw shade at another tour guide who camped it up and wore costumes and put on a performance. She was very much history first, only talk about ghost stories if she talked to a person who experienced it. So I told her I was in room 428 the previous night. And she said, "Did I see anything?" And I said, "No." She said, "Did you hear anything?" I said, "Yeah, I heard people above me walking around and moving things around. It was really annoying." She goes, "There's nothing above you. There's only the off-limits roof, which is at a very heavy slant, so people can't walk on it. You were hearing footsteps in a space where people cannot exist."
Whoa.
Oh my God! So you did experience supernatural.
So I did experience something. I didn't see anything, but I did. Also, she said that me waking up repeatedly throughout the night is common. She said people on the 4th floor often request to move because they have extreme nightmares and can't sleep, which I also had in my night there.
Oh my gosh! So you did.
Yeah, like I said, it can easily be chalked up to an old historical building. It's literally a historical landmark protected by the government. So it is literally a piece of history at this point. This old hotel. So it's very easy to say, "Oh, it was the wind. It was the old building shifting. It's the old building on a mountain. Of course, it's going to shift." But I'm choosing to believe there were ghosts walking above me in the ceiling. Haunted room. Oh, interestingly, I was kicked out of the room.
Wait. So when you were on this ghost tour, did you experience anything on that? Because I had a friend. I recently went to the Queen Mary, and my friend said he took a tour of the Queen Mary. They have a ghost tour, and while he was on this ghost tour, he really wanted to experience something. So he started screaming "If you're here, do something! Make a noise!" And everybody else on the tour was like, "Shut up, dude!" Did you experience anything?
The ghost tour was mostly quiet. We went all over the property. We went to the tunnels underneath the Stanley, which are full of quartz, which is why paranormal experts believe it's haunted, because the quartz traps spiritual energy if you believe that thing. We also went to the old ballroom or concert venue. I don't remember the exact name for it. It's on property. and went to the basement, and there's a door there that's always propped on with a brick, because if it's not bricked up, it will sometimes just sit there open without being touched. Sometimes they'll slowly close. Sometimes they'll slam suddenly. And we were sitting there, and at first she moved the brick, and the door very slowly started closing, like very, very slowly. I thought, and my first thought was, it's an old building on a mountain. It's shifting. Of course, the door is going to close. But then she opened it again, and then let go of it again, and stayed still, not moving at all for a good 2 minutes until it suddenly slammed shut in the middle of her presentation. So I'm not saying that there are ghosts everywhere.
It must have been a gust of wind, right?
It must have been. But my whole thing is like, believe what you want to believe. Like I said, I'm a believer in ghosts, for better or for worse. But I try to approach it skeptically. I try not to believe anything that could be fake. That door, it was a weird door, Peter. It was a weird freaking door. So we'll see. Like every building on that property has a ghost story. There are ghosts everywhere, and I was just talking to a desk clerk while checking in, and she said that she does not go on the fourth floor. She straight up does not go up there. She's had enough bad experiences. So the people there tend to vary from just an old building to nope, evil place or haunted place. Most of the ghosts are apparently quite friendly and don't mean you harm, but some people just don't take the chances.
Jacob, a lot of times on these set visits and press trips, it's very controlled, and you're very like you basically like fly in, do a thing at one location, and fly out. Did you get a chance to like explore the rest of Colorado at all while you were there?
I got the chance to explore Estes Park quite a bit. They actually had there's no ride shares in Estes Park. It's too small of a town. Nobody's driving Lyft or Uber, so they had like shuttles going back and forth to the town, which is a very small town. It's a tourism town. It's like Amity. They make all their money in the summer when 5 million people visit the national park nearby, and then it gets quiet for a while. And since it's winter and it's cold down there, a lot of the shops were closed. Some shops were like having clearance sales because they're trying to get rid of all their gear before they close it for the rest of the season. But enough stuff was open that I was able to do a lot of shopping. I did a 5-mile hike around the local lake, which was amazing, and it was the coldest I've ever been in my entire life because it was 30 miles per hour wind, so it felt like 14 degrees. I had icicles in my beard, which is a first for me. A random anecdote. I was literally on this hike when A24 called me and said, hey, do you want to interview Robert Eggers, and director of Lighthouse, in 10 minutes? And I originally was going to interview them much later in the day. So I said, sure, let's talk to Robert Eggers while I stand here in the cold. So when you read my interview with Lighthouse director Robert Eggers, imagine me literally
with
chilled.
Icicles in your beard doing the interview.
Yeah, to the point where at one point Robert Eggers just had to pause and go like essentially say like, can you please mute your phone when you're not talking? It's too windy. So I felt like a shit. But it was you'll read the interview soon enough. The real highlight of the trip for me though was WB organized Jeep tours of the Rocky Mountains, because Estes Park is literally 2 minutes from the Rocky Mountain National Park, and it's my first time in the Rockies, and I immediately want to go back. I'm already planning a trip back with my wife. She's been before, and what an amazing place. What a beautiful, incredible place. Just 95% of that park is untouched. That's like the rules they have. Like the paths really aren't paved. They have no recreation. Like when the government first bought the land, they tore down the ski resort that was in there and like restored it. It's like natural land. And the Jeep tour just drove us for 3 hours all over the park. We couldn't go to the highest paths because it was too cold and icy, and we were crashed. But we were able to drive to remote areas and park and hike for a few minutes out into the wilderness, and walking through ankle deep snow around frozen lakes. We saw moose, we saw deer, we saw elk. It was just an absolutely incredible experience. And I'm gonna be a jerk here for a second, because we went out in 4 Jeeps, and 3 of the Jeeps demanded to turn back halfway through the tour because they were too cold. And these were a lot of social media influencers who showed up wearing designer boots and without jackets and no gloves to freaking Colorado. So our WB rep came to us and said, 3 of the Jeeps are going back. Do you guys want to go back? And I immediately said, no, I am not going back. And I don't know if the rest of my tour was shamed or they agreed, but we finished the damn tour, and I saw the rest of the Rocky Mountain tour. And if you go on my Instagram or my Twitter feed, you can see some photos from that. And because I did my research, I was triple layered. I had hiking boots. I had thick socks. I had a proper hat and gloves. I was prepared for Colorado. I didn't show up Instagram ready. Look, and if you're listening to this and this was you, I apologize. But really ground my gears was that the one group demanded to turn back, and then asked their Jeep tour driver to find them from trees that still had leaves so they take fall pictures for their Instagrams.
Oh my god!
I was horrified. I was thinking, WB is spending all this money on you to have a good time and doing a once in a lifetime thing, and you want to take Instagram pictures in front of fall trees. All right, I'm sorry if that's you and you're listening.
And I'm sure these people are from LA. I'm ashamed. I'm sorry, Jacob.
Yeah, but like I don't know. I end up talking like great length with my Jeep tour driver, and he recommended other national parks to visit. So, just I engaged with the locals. I dressed warmly and had an amazing time in the Rocky Mountains. It was incredible. What was not incredible was the Shining Ball. This was my hell. It is the Stanley Hotel's annual Halloween party. Everybody shows up dressed in costume. And live music, so crowded, old building with live music is my hell. Fortunately,
wait a second. So the Stanley Hotel is not the hotel that The Shining was filmed at, but it's based on that.
Yeah, it's where Stephen King visited and was inspired to write The Shining there. The hotel where The Shining was actually filmed, I believe, is in Oregon. But the Shining Ball was just an excuse for men dressed like the twins from The Shining. I was like, swear to God, 65% of the costumes were men dressed as the twins from The Shining, thinking they were being clever. But what they do have there was that they had an open bar in the VIP area, which I was allowed into. So I went and sat down in the VIP balcony, the haunted VIP balcony, I was told later. Drank at the open bar until I was incredibly drunk, and then walked back to my hotel room and never thought about the Shining Ball again. So I was the guy who was like, yeah, nature, Jeeps, outdoor driving and walking, whereas everyone else everyone else was equally excited about being at the big party. So that was that. I guess something for everyone at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. Also, I guess one last thing I want to talk about is I did interview talent from the film. I interviewed Kylie Curran, who plays Abra, who is a young girl who has The Shining as well. She becomes like Danny's protege in the book and the movie. She is the purest thing I've ever encountered. She must be protected at all costs. She would always refer to everybody on the set by their first name and like Mr. or Miss. So it's always Mr. Mike for Mike Flanagan, or Mr. Ewan for Ewan McGregor, or Miss Rebecca for Rebecca Ferguson. And it's like, we go, oh my goodness, like she's talking about Ewan McGregor, talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it's like, oh, Mr. Ewan told me this. I'm like, oh, that's the sweetest damn thing. I interviewed Trevor Macy, who's Mike Flanagan's longtime producer. I'll have the interview up soon. Interviewed Mike Flanagan, who is one of the best interviews I've ever had. The nicest, smartest, sweetest guy. So many directors it's like pulling teeth. They clearly don't want to be there. Mike Flanagan wants to talk about his movies. He wants to engage. And I hope he can run the interview on this podcast in addition to the written version. We talked some pretty major spoilers at one point. There's a scene I will not spoil. That's not in the Dr. Sleep book. It's not in any of the marketing, but it's going to be the scene people will be talking about. And I can't wait for you to hear Mike Flanagan's reasoning for why it exists. The non-spoiler version is that it's a scene he wrote to convince Stephen King to let them make Dr. Sleep, because Stephen King was hesitant about letting them do it. So it's the scene, and Mike Flanagan told me that it's the scene that, as the filmmaker, he thinks it's the right decision, but as a fan of The Shining, he still waffles back and forth on it. So it's gonna be the thing that people talk about, and I got the complete story about that scene and its genesis and how it came to be. So when you see Dr. Sleep in a few weeks, you'll know the scene. We'll have the full story for you. And also, Dr. Sleep is the fourth Mike Flanagan project to feature a horrible hand injury. So the interview has us talking at length about hand injuries and horror. So look for that. But yeah, what an amazing trip. You'll see all the interviews soon enough. And like I said, Chris will write the review because I feel very compromised to write about that movie now.
Yeah, well, very, very cool. We'll try to get some more. I'll try to pry a reaction out of you later in this podcast. But let's move on to what we've been reading. And Jacob, you have been reading Dr. Sleep.
Yes, I reread Dr. Sleep on the plane ride over and in the days leading up to the screening of Dr. Sleep. And I think this book's okay. It's not as good as the Shining movie, not as good as the Shining book. Stephen King it's very clearly a personal book for him. It's about redemption and recovery. Danny Torrance, now Dan Torrance, the kid from The Shining, has grown up, and it follows him as an adult. It's about him, finding AA and recovering and, taking control of his life and his ability to shine in his psychic powers. And there's some really moving stuff in there, and the character stuff works. I just don't think the plot works. It's almost as if a very talented filmmaker could take the structure of this book and then transplant it into a much better movie that pleases people in a better way. But who knows? I can't talk about the movie yet, so who knows if that happened.
Interesting. Okay, Ben, you've probably also been reading some stuff, right?
Yeah, I read, it's called Game of Thrones, A Guide to Westeros and Beyond, the complete series. So I think it's Chronicle Books is the publisher that put this out, and they sent this to me, and it actually, I didn't realize who the author was, but when I got this in the mail, I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's written by Miles McNutt, who is a well-respected TV critic and has been a guest on the Slash Filmcast, and I remember in the early days of the Slash Filmcast hearing him on there and following his TV criticism and stuff since then, and I just didn't have any idea that he had a book coming out. So it's a nice surprise to get that. The book is pretty good. It's as the title indicates, it's just a guide. So it's not necessarily going to tell you anything that you didn't already know about the series. If you're a hardcore Game of Thrones fan, if you've read, George R.R. Martin's books and were obsessed with the series, I don't know if this book is really the thing that you're looking for. But for people who were more casual watchers of the show, people who finished the show but maybe didn't dive every single week into theories and breakdowns and really go deep on the experience, I think this is like sort of the perfect in-between type of book for viewers like that. It has like infographics tracking the number of weddings and funerals and battles and like fun things like the number of drinks of wine between Cersei and Tyrion. Like there's a comparison chart there. There's like maps and essays about the characters tracking their journeys all across the course of the show. So it has a lot of good stuff in it. It's just not really anything, I guess, groundbreaking or new, but then again, because it's called a guide, it's not really trying to do that. So I think for what it is trying to do, it's pretty good. So the book comes out on November 5th, and it's called Game of Thrones, A Guide to Westeros and Beyond, the complete series.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been watching. I finally got to see HBO's Watchmen, which, by the way, after watching this pilot episode, I went to sleep listening to the spoiler podcast that you guys recorded on Monday. And I don't know what happened, but like I fell asleep like 10 minutes into it, and like every 10 minutes I'd wake up and just hear like you guys talking about Watchmen in my ears. Because
I'm so glad that our conversation was compelling enough to put you to sleep, Peter.
No, but it was like haunting my dreams. Like it was like I'd go to sleep and I would have like dreams of Watchmen conversations, and then wake up and you guys were like
not Watchmen, just Watchmen conversations.
Yeah, like it was like I don't know, and it felt like it was. I mean. I guess it does sound insulting, but the podcast episode felt like it was like 10 hours long because I just kept on falling asleep and waking up and it was still going.
This is such a glowing praise for our work. Peter.
Yes, I need to.
Love to hear it. Love to hear it from your boss. Love that.
Well, here's the lesson here is don't go to sleep listening to a conversation about a topic that is so, so complicated, so complex as Watchmen. But I also feel like after half listening to your episode that I also need to rewatch the episode on HBO, and I need to re-listen to your podcast episode. So I don't really feel like giving a in-depth reaction to Watchmen, but I will say that I liked it a lot, and I feel like I missed some stuff. So I feel like I need to rewatch it again. But maybe that's what Lindelof wants. Ben, what did you think of Watchmen?
I really loved it, and as you mentioned, HT and Chris and I had a big conversation about it. I actually was kind of proud of that conversation. I thought we covered pretty much all of it. It was
very good. I was just very tired.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess just in order to save time, I'll just sort of point people to that because I feel like we covered. It was like almost an hour long, and I feel like we really sort of ran the gamut on all of the big talking points. Anyway, I'm sure there's still a lot more of the Easter eggs and stuff that even we didn't catch the first time around. But I really enjoyed that hour of TV.
Yeah, I definitely want to revisit it. Am I the only one here? Like, I know you guys all love this episode, but like, are you gonna rewatch it before the second episode? Any of you?
I don't have any plans to rewatch it. I don't know. Either of you guys?
I might rewatch it because it's fun just to talk and unpack everything about what happened and see if we missed any of the nuances that we didn't catch the first time around.
I mean, I feel like HBO's going for something like this, especially like what they've been doing with Westworld. Like, I feel like their shows are kind of like, you want to rewatch them before the next episode. There's so much there. Jacob, what is your excuse for not watching Watchmen yet? You're like the biggest Watchmen fan of everybody on the staff.
I was too busy being in the Rocky Mountains and watching Doctor Sleep to watch Watchmen.
But Jacob, you could have left the tour early and went back and watched it on HBO Go.
Peter, then I would be a monster. You know what, Peter?
You could have watched it on your cell phone while you're taking Instagram pictures.
As it was meant to be seen.
I would have been the guys behind me before Doctor Sleep who set up their camera crews and then faked their whole casual sitting down for the movie conversation and then did 3 takes of it. Because, you know, they needed to make sure that their YouTube channel had footage of them sitting down for the movie. But, you know, just doing it once casually, you know, because they're just buds. They're just buds watching a movie, man. But they did it 4 or 5 times right behind me. You know, it's not, you know, all staged, all fake. You know, maybe they found time for Watchmen. Maybe they did.
Name names, Jacob. We need names.
I literally did not know any of the social media people. It made me feel ancient.
Okay, let's move on to Jojo Rabbit. I talked about this last week. I think Chris talked about it a few weeks before that. HT and Ben, you both saw this. Let's start out with HT. What did you think?
I really love Jojo Rabbit. It's such a moving, heartwarming comedy that really does straddle the line between like satire and sympathetic. But I loved it so dearly that I feel like it doesn't deserve all of the divisive sort of discussions and debates going around it. I do think there are discussions to be had about the idea of whether humanizing Nazis is something that should be done right now, but I don't think that is necessarily what Jojo Rabbit is doing. I think it's something much more complex and layered than that, and the fact that it wears its heart on its sleeve so obviously shows that it's not just about like humanizing monsters, but revealing, I feel like, the fact that there are people and complex people who are, you know, flawed and good in many ways on both sides. I mean, now that I say it, does sound like I'm trying to both sides things, which I feel really bad about, but I don't think that's the case. And I think Jojo Rabbit articulates it so well because it's such a wonderful, heartwarming film.
Yeah, it's kind of like the surface layer gives you a little bit of humor to those characters, but what the movie's message is not a both sides type of message, you know? So yeah. I think that's where maybe some of the divisiveness is coming from, is people, I don't know, maybe just...
Ben, are you saying people are bad at watching movies?
I guess they're just taking issue with the way this particular story is told, Chris. I don't know.
I don't know. I saw this at TIFF. I gave this a rave review. Everyone at TIFF loved it. And then, like, the next day, the backlash, like, immediately started. And, like, there are people who are acting like this is not just a bad movie, but like one of the worst movies of the year. And I don't know what is going on with this. I mean, you know, everyone's opinion is different on things, but I think it's a wonderful movie. I'm very surprised at the weird sort of reactions to this. I mean, I get it. It's a tricky subject, but I think the movie handles that subject really well, and it does it in this very interesting way. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Chris, are
no,
you
I think
suggesting
you're
that
right,
people
Chris.
is Chris suggesting that people sometimes don't know how to properly talk about art?
I would never do that. I mean,
people like to talk in keywords and and phrases that are hot topic, or I don't know what the word is, but, you know, keywords and those kind of things. And I think it reduces a film like Jojo Rabbit down to a tagline, and I don't think that's the case. I think that this is a film that is really deeply human and humanistic and comes from a really complicated, really dark time in our history from that perspective.
Were you looking for buzzwords?
Buzzword. That's what I was looking for.
I'll just say really quickly that I liked the movie and didn't love it. I appreciated it. I think the biggest thing for me was that I just wanted it to be a little bit funnier than it was. I think it's one of those movies where I was like smiling most of the way through it, but rarely actually laughing out loud. And based on Taika Waititi's previous work, I was just sort of hoping for more laugh out loud moments. I guess that's probably a problem with my own expectations of the movie versus what it actually is. But that's just how I walked away from it. So I liked it. I would recommend it. I just didn't love it as much as I hoped I would.
I think I fall closest to Ben. Like, I was smiling throughout, and I did really like it. Like, I looked at my best of the year list if it was published today, and still it's in there. But I think that says more about this year in movies than it does that film in particular. But
or what you've seen so far, anyway.
Or what I've seen. Yeah, what I've seen. Yeah, that is true. I have not seen a couple of the big films that you guys have loved, but I feel like this year has not been that great thus far. But I could be wrong. Okay, what have I seen? What did I watch this week? And I guess my list of things that I watched this week is not going to convince you that I'm making good choices. But I did go to the Mandalorian junket, and I was presented with a 27-minute special presentation of footage from The Mandalorian. This is the upcoming Disney Plus series from producer Jon Favreau. It wasn't 30 minutes of the pilot episode. It was 30 minutes of combined footage from the first 3 episodes. The reason why they did this is supposedly because they wanted to keep the surprises under wraps. So, like, it would show a scene and someone would come into a doorway or something like that. I'm being very vague because I'm not allowed to talk plot specifics. And they would cut. So we wouldn't know who was it that came through the doorway. Do you know what I mean? Like, so they're trying to keep... When we talk to the filmmakers involved, they don't want us asking questions that are spoilers. This is something that has been done with the previous Star Wars films. I think Solo might be the only one that, like, we got to see it before the junket. And but the interesting thing here is apparently they are not going to be giving copies of The Mandalorian to critics before they release on the service. Disney Plus is going to be giving copies of the other shows and stuff like that. I'm not sure if the Marvel shows, but like other shows on that service. But I guess critics are going to have to watch Mandalorian at the same time as general audiences. And Chris, I'm wondering. I know that you might not have been in line to review this, but like, how do you feel about that? Like is that? And I know that some critics have been online complaining about this, but why should be like, why is it just critics are upset that they didn't get something early, or is there a benefit for critics? I guess I'm handing you I'm basically making your argument for you, but what do you think about this?
I mean, I guess it depends on where you fall on this argument, and I don't know. I think the benefit of giving critics things early is to, I don't know how to go about this without being like, it's my job. I need this to happen, or I don't have a job.
Well, you like, also have to have a review up the next morning, and then like, right. If you see this film and it comes out that we don't even know when this is going to come out. If this comes out at midnight, and say you were reviewing this, you would have to watch it at midnight and then stay up until right. 5 a.m. writing.
Right, exactly, and that's not fun. I don't know. I mean, like, this is a thing that, like, it doesn't affect you if you're not a critic, I guess, but I don't know.
I think it is going to affect people that are not critics because they're going to end up getting subpar criticism.
Right, because people are going to have to rush it, and, you know, I mean, I do think there is something to be said about embargo dates, and, like, you know, the embargo for, like, Joker broke, like, months in advance, and by the time the movie came out, it felt like old news. So I do think there is something to be said about having embargo dates be a little closer to release dates. Like Terminator is another one. That embargo's up. That movie's not out for like 2 weeks. And it feels like by the time that comes out, we're already going to be done talking about it. But at the same time, it's, you know, to hold it until like the last minute like that I think it does the show a disservice. But, you know, I'm sure people will disagree.
I agree. And especially something like Star Wars or Marvel, where there's like Easter eggy things and connections to other things in the cinematic universes. I feel like that stuff requires research. It requires some time, and I really hope Disney Plus decides to change their stance on that. But anyways, I'm not allowed to review this what I saw, but I can give you a reaction, which I gave on social media. I will say that this is like a thrilling return to the era of the original trilogy. I mean, I guess it's after that, but it feels very much like the original trilogy, and this feels more like a big scale movie than it does a TV series. Like, it looks and feels expensive. The CG, like I feel like we always throughout our lives have been chasing, like from Star Trek to whatever, we've been chasing CG that looked as good as it does on the big screen, and that we had moments of that, like the space battles and like Battlestar Galactica, stuff like that. Like there was moments where like we made major leaps, and I feel like this is making a huge leap for us here because it really does feel like a movie. The score is awesome. Seeing Dave Filoni, who's done Star Wars Rebels and Clone Wars, do live action Star Wars, it's everything I wanted. And
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer this because I don't know if it'll count as a review or not. But so much was made about the tech on this show, like how they're doing like the backgrounds and stuff. Like, did you notice anything like that? Or
I did not notice anything having to do with background, but honestly, the best special effects are the ones you don't notice, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I will say that The Mandalorian at one point has some altercation with some creatures, and those creatures look fully realized in a photoreal way that, like, I'm guessing uses the same technology that Jon Favreau used on like Jungle Book and Lion King. Like, they look like real. Which I'm sure maybe some people might even complain because the creatures in Star Wars are supposed to look more puppeted, I think. But I don't know. Some intense stuff. I was really impressed by this. I can't wait to see more. I can't wait for November 12th to come. It's my birthday, and it's also the launch of Disney Plus and the show, so I'm super excited. So, yeah, it looks like we're all going to be watching this together. I also went to the theater to see Zombieland Double Tap. I used my AMC A-list because, I got to make use of that somehow. And this is the sequel to the movie that came out, I think, a decade ago or so. This is enjoyable but disposable. Zoe Dutch is amazing in it. So much of it feels like there's these jokes about, like, I think someone says, like Tallahassee says, like, his nut up or shut up line. And then someone says, like, that's so 2009. And so much of this film feels like that. But it is enjoyable, more enjoyable than I thought it was going to be. The ending is complete and utter crap. But yeah, I would give like Zombieland like maybe a 3 out of 5 stars or something like that. The next thing I want to talk about, this is something I want to recommend to everybody. I watched this series called Unbelievable on Netflix, and this is a true crime. It's an 8-episode limited series. I would say it's very binge worthy. Like we got through it in 2 days. It starts out with an 18-year-old girl, played by Caitlin Dever, who we saw in Booksmart, and she was also in Short Term 12. She's fantastic in this. She was also in Justified. She is raped. She suffers a rape. The story isn't so much about her. I don't know how much I want to give away, but there's an investigation into her case. There is a serial rapist that is being investigated by Toni Collette. She plays Detective Grace Rosamond and Merritt Weaver. And this limited series, I guess it could be an anthology series because Unbelievable is such like a broad word for a show, was co-created by Susanna Grant, who was the writer of Erin Brockovich. She also wrote an episode. Michael Dinner from Justified directed an episode. Lisa Cholodinko, oh my god, I can't pronounce her name.
Cholodinko, I think.
Cholodinko, yes. Who directed The Kids Are All Right, which I know Jacob hates. She also directed the episode. This has such intense, powerful performances. If I'm going to tell you one show that you're not watching on TV that is on right now, this is on Netflix, and you're probably like scrolling by it, the tile, I would say check out Unbelievable on Netflix. It's so good. I will say that like it starts off one way and becomes a different thing. Like Toni Collette, I would say is the main character of the piece, I think, and she doesn't appear until really episode 3. end of episode 2. So it is not done in a traditional way. I would highly recommend this. I think, Ben, I think this is totally up your alley, because you like kind of true crime stuff.
Yeah, it's in my queue. I'm very much looking forward to it. You're not the first person that I've heard rave about the show, so I'm really looking forward to checking this one out.
Yeah. Okay, and I also finished watching HBO's Years After Years. I did like this series. I talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago. I will say that the last episode is kind of a failing of massive proportions, but I would still recommend you see it, even if that whole concept sounded appealing to you. HT, I tried watching Dark Crystal. Here's where you get mad at me.
Oh, no.
This show starts. It's so beautiful. The puppets are amazing. It's a complete perfect mashup of a CG world and these sets, these elaborate sets, and the puppets, and it's just so beautiful. And like this series opens up with like much like the film, where it has like this voiceover for like the first 10 minutes while it's explaining everything about this world, and it's also using like this Game of Thrones where it's like jumping from land to land, like giving you the layout of everything. And I was just like, I just can't do this right now.
No, you have to get past that, because I will say those first 10 minutes are rough, because it just kind of it first gives you that exposition dump, and then it just drops you in the middle of this giant lavish world. But it gets so good, Peter. It gets so good.
Yeah, I maybe I'll give it another chance, because I love Henson. I want to love this. I'm also not a fantasy person. I don't know. I will give it another chance, because it does look so beautiful. I watched the pilot episode of the ABC series Stumptown. That stars Colby Smulders. You might know her from the Avengers and the Marvel films. She plays a smart-witted Army veteran who becomes a private investigator in Portland, Oregon, which is also known as Stumptown, where she takes care of her brother. This comes from creator Greg Rucka. It has Jake Johnson, some other people that you might like. The soundtrack is incredible. Like, it just has like hit after hit, has some fun action, but I couldn't get through the entire first episode, actually, because it feels like so networky. I feel like such a snob. But like, whenever I give a network show a chance, like, it just feels like I just can't do it. Like those where it like has the cliffhanger before the commercial, and it's just like too glossy and not edgy enough and not real. I don't know. Does anybody else here have problems watching network television now that we live in the streaming age?
Oh yeah, all the time. I feel the same sort of like. I don't know, elitism, I guess you would call it. Like, that's the feeling I get whenever I try to watch a network show. And there are some exceptions, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine and The Good Place and stuff like that are network shows, and I thank God for them every day, because they're incredible shows and I love them. But when it comes to like procedural stuff like that, it just feels so of another era compared to all the stuff that's been on, in cable and streaming over the past decade plus.
Like, the whole time I was watching it, I was just thinking like, how much better this could be if it was on Netflix or even like AMC or something. It just like doesn't quite get there, but I think people will like it. So I don't know. Watch it if you're okay watching network TV.
The comic's really good, Peter, and I feel like ABC is just a bad fit for that comic. Every time it's like an AMC or an HBO show, which they somehow put on network. Kind of drives me crazy.
Yeah. I will say that she is great in this role. Like, she's really, I feel like she hasn't gotten a chance to show off her acting chops, like, especially in like big films. She's been kind of just like, she's an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., like in that kind of stuff. Like this, she actually gets a lot of room to actually show you her acting abilities. So yeah. Anyways, I also watched Between Two Ferns, the movie on Netflix, because we were bored and we couldn't find anything to watch. Kitra put this on. I'm not a big fan of, honestly, of Zach Galifianakis or the Between the Two Ferns, but I did enjoy watching them because, in their time they were funny. This movie, I think, is less so. It has this contrived story of him, the character he plays, traveling the country to tape interviews. It ends with a credit scene that takes place with like bloopers, and I think the blooper reel is probably funnier than the movie itself. Has anybody else seen this? Guessing not. No. Okay.
I think Brad talked about it.
Yeah.
If I could be wrong about that, but I think he has watched it.
Yeah, I think it's a skip unless you like really, really, really love Zach Galifianakis. Yeah. So, Jacob, you mentioned earlier that you saw Doctor Sleep and you couldn't talk about it, but we're now like so far into this podcast. No studio is listening, so you can tell us, right?
I cannot tell you about anything about Doctor Sleep until the embargo breaks on Friday, where I may or may not talk about how it may or may not be another winner from Mike Flanagan, but I can't say that.
Ah, interesting. Okay, then I guess we'll just go to Ben. Ben, what have you been watching this week?
I had a couple interviews over the past few days, so I've been rewatching some things that I've seen before. First up was Paradise Hills, which was my favorite movie at this year's Sundance Film Festival. This movie comes out this Friday, I think in limited release, but I had a chance to speak with the director, Alice Waddington, so I wanted to rewatch the movie, and it's been, 10 months since I've seen the movie, so I just wanted to make sure that I had everything right, and I still really, really like that movie a lot. I think I was blown away by the visual style of it the first time, and once that sort of magic wears off a little bit, then the movie doesn't quite stand on like this super high plateau that I put it on after first viewing. But that's sort of an unfair thing to try to apply to any movie after you see it more than once. So I still stand by my praise for this movie. I think there's a lot to really, really love here. And especially for a smaller budgeted movie, I think it has a lot to offer in terms of visuals, and the performances are all really good. So anyway, that's Paradise Hills. It comes out in theaters this Friday. I also rewatched The Pixar Story, which was from 2007. It was a documentary written and directed by Leslie Iwerks, who I had a chance to interview because late last week I went to a brief presentation from Disney Plus about the documentary stuff that they have coming up on the streaming service. And Leslie Iwerks is going to be directing something called The Imagineering Story, which is sort of like her version of the Pixar Story, but for Disney Imagineering. So it's all about the theme parks and all of that stuff. I didn't see any footage from that aside from the trailer that's already been made available online. But having a chance to talk to her, I wanted to rewatch The Pixar Story, which traces the first, it's like the definitive Pixar documentary in terms of how the company came to be. It's all stories that we're probably all familiar with at this point, but just as I appreciated the actual craft of the, being able to put the story together in a cohesive and entertaining way. It is really weird to see John Lasseter, front and center in this thing, knowing the stories that we've heard about him since since then in the past year or so. It's very, very strange to go back and think about some of the things that maybe were going on behind the scenes that nobody knew about. So yeah, so I guess because of that, I don't know if I can recommend wholeheartedly like going back to check this out, because it might just weird people out to do that. Because he is all over this thing. He is like the primary force behind it, and I don't want to discount like his contributions to Disney and Pixar and storytelling and animation and directing and all that stuff, but it is just it's a strange thing to do. So wanted to mention that.
Yeah. And it's also a movie that's like produced alongside Disney and feels very candy coated.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not much in there by way of it's not really like uncover. You don't get the sense anyway that it's uncovering every single stone, and it's really like going after the hard truth of what happened there. They sort of tell some stories about a few disagreements here and there, but you don't really get the sense that this is like the full uncut version of the story. And I don't know if we're ever going to get that, especially, with the Disney umbrella sort of protecting Pixar. But yeah, it seems like maybe there's a little bit more to tell, so maybe somebody will do that one day. But in any case, I am looking forward to the Imagineering Story. That looks pretty good. So that'll be a day one release on Disney Plus.
And that's not just a movie; that's like a series, right?
Yeah, it's a 6-episode, I think 6-hour series about the entire history of Imagineering. I feel like you, Peter, and
Yeah.
Jacob are just gonna have a field day with that thing. So, but I had a good chat with iWorks about it, and we'll probably play that maybe a little closer to that show's release. I also
guys,
rewatched
on November 12th, I'm taking the day off, just so you know.
There you go. Celebrate your birthday in style. I also rewatched Toy Story of Terror, which is a movie that my wife and I try to watch every Halloween, and or Halloween season, I should say. This is from 2013. It's like a 22-minute short set in the Toy Story world, and I probably talked about it, in previous October episodes of this podcast. I'm not going to really go long on it or anything. It's a lot of fun. I would recommend, if you are still subscribing to cable, if you haven't cut the cord or whatever, or I guess maybe I was going to say cable, but it's really on ABC is where a lot of times it plays. Sometimes it plays on Freeform, which used to be ABC Family. So anyway, maybe just search for it if you're in your like DVR or whatever, and you might be able to find it, playing and repeating over and over again as the actual Halloween approaches. But I would recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and it sort of it plays well on what had been established in the Toy Story franchise up until that point, like Jesse's fear of being in a box. That's like a big part of this thing. So that's Toy Story of Terror. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so then moving on beyond things that I rewatched, I watched two movies new to me this week. One is in theaters this Friday. It's called Making Waves: The Art of Cinematic Sound, and it's a documentary about sound in movies, sound designers, sound editors, Foley artists, all of that stuff. So it's very technical, and if you're or the documentary itself is not technical. It's actually pretty light, but if you're interested in the technical side of filmmaking, I would recommend it. It's like an hour and a half, and it comes out in theaters. I don't know if I would recommend seeing it in the theaters. It doesn't really seem like a theatrical release to me. It seems like it should probably be going, or might be better served for people who are interested, straight, where you can just watch it from the comfort of your couch. But it touches on Ben Burtt, who is the famous sound designer behind Star Wars, and Walter Murch, and the history of like American Zoetrope, the company that Coppola and all those guys founded, and it touches on a lot of like innovations in sound, like Citizen Kane, for example. I knew was hailed at the time for its cinematography and like editing innovations, but I had no idea that it was also breaking new ground in the sound department as well, because Orson Welles really like gave every location in that movie its own soundscape, like echoes in big rooms and sort of reverberations and stuff like that weren't really being done on that scale at that time. So even me, somebody who has worked on in the film industry a little bit here and there, and thought I knew a lot about how the sound department works. It taught me some stuff too. So anyway, that's Making Waves: The Art of Cinematic Sound. It's in theaters this Friday. And then finally, really quickly, I watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and holy shit, this movie blew me away. Yes. It's like up there with Parasite for me as like my 1 and 2 of the year so far. It is so incredible. So the movie is written and directed by Céline Sciamma. I think that's how you pronounce it. French director. It's a French movie. It is unbelievable. It's about this woman who is an artist who she's a painter, and she goes to paint a portrait of this sort of enigmatic woman on an isolated island somewhere. And the woman whose portrait is being painted doesn't want it to be painted, because it means that when the portrait is done, it's going to be presented to her suitor as part of this wedding, this elaborate wedding thing. And so once this painting is done, it basically means she's taking the next step into a different chapter of her life. So she has been, I guess there have been multiple painters who have tried to capture her likeness and failed, because this woman is basically like sabotaging all of the artists that have been coming along. So this movie follows this painter who goes and sort of like surreptitiously tries to paint her, like without her knowledge. And it just becomes, I don't want to really give much away, but it's one of the most profoundly human and just deeply moving movies I've seen in a long, long time. It is really beautiful filmmaking and incredible performances from the leads who I'd never seen before. So that kind of helps, like immerse you into that world as well. man, this is just like, for me, easily one of the best movies of the year. So it's called Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I would highly, highly recommend it. It comes out in the US on December 6th.
Why didn't I watch this instead of Between Two Ferns or Zombieland Double Tap?
I'll never know, Peter.
What am I doing with my life? I still need to see that. That's on my list. And the other, Parasite, is also, yeah.
Oh, God, Peter, you watched that before you saw Parasite? What are you doing with your life?
No wonder you think this year isn't good for movies.
Yeah,
You're missing out on
exactly.
two of the best movies of the year.
Parasite is not available on AMC A-List. I missed all my screenings, so I'm waiting until there's an opportunity because I'm paying for this A-List. Why should I pay for an actual movie?
Because it's the best movie of this year and it's worth your money. Go see it, Peter.
They're showing Parasite now on AMC A-List Artisan.
Are they?
I just booked a ticket for it. So
Okay,
you should
maybe
go
it
see it.
happened this week or something because I think last week I looked and it wasn't available in my area. But okay, HC, what have you been watching?
I've had a more mixed bag of movies this week. I saw Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, for which I wrote the review, and you can see that on the site. And I have to say that this movie was a disappointment to me. I am one of the few people who actually liked the 2014 Maleficent. I really enjoyed how it was a subversion of the traditional Sleeping Beauty fairy tale and kind of reframed the villain of that piece to be not more more sympathetic, but also more of a complex person, and turned it basically into this rape revenge story, which I really enjoyed the social sort of added social commentary and depth to that. And Maleficent, Mistress of Evil does something of the same thing in an attempt to tell a sort of socially relevant issue and turn it into a greater sort of fairy tale metaphor, and it does that with basically a Holocaust metaphor. There's a fairy genocide in this, basically, and I really admired what it was trying to do in terms of expanding the world and the mythology and creating this really, really lavish, beautiful design for some of these sort of cavernous landscapes that we get to see. But there is an ending that I won't spoil that really sours me on what the movie was trying to do and made me almost actively angry about with this film. It just kind of tries to give a fairy tale ending to something that's a lot more complex and harder and challenging than that. So I think that it tries to do something a little bit more ambitious and audacious, but it kind of stumbles and doesn't stick the landing, which is unfortunate because it really does look beautiful. And at points reminds me of something like Avatar meets Dark Crystal meets some of like the Game of Thrones political intriguing and scheming that takes place. So it tries a lot, but it doesn't succeed at everything it's trying to do.
Very well. That sucks. What else have you been watching?
Another disappointing movie, and this is a movie called Black and Blue. It stars Naomi Harris and Tyrese Gibson, and Naomi Harris stars as a rookie policewoman in New Orleans who accidentally captures on her body cam the shooting of a young drug dealer by one of her a policeman, and she basically tries to run from capture by the police that are all corrupt and expose the corruption with the footage that she captured. And I feel like there was some socio-political commentary that this film is trying to portray or deliver, and it does not. It oft just ends up doing away with that for a Jason Bourne style thriller that really reduces whatever it was intending to do. Basically, the two movies that I saw were disappointed with were movies that had some noble social intention and ended up botching those. And Black and Blue did that, unfortunately.
That is also disappointing.
Yes. But a movie that I did enjoy that I watched on the Criterion channel is A Hard Day's Night. This is the Beatles sort of mock mockumentary rock and roll musical. It's not really a mockumentary, I guess. It's more of just kind of a musical comedy. And it's one that is considered one of the classic rock and roll comedies. And it's so fun. I know of A Hard Day's Night. I know like the place that it holds in pop culture, but I hadn't realized how much of an impact it had on pop culture, because so much of this film, which is really just like an absurd day in the life comedy that has shades of Monty Python and a lot of wry British humor, it has trickled down to a lot of things I loved. I can specifically say maybe like Ferris Bueller and its depiction of just like these ragamuffin scoundrels who are off and like having a bunch of antics. A lot of the imagery and a lot of those themes are shared between A Hard Day's Night and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and I really enjoyed watching that. And this is a film that I highly recommend. It's directed by Richard Lester, stars the Beatles as heightened versions of themselves as they attempt to make a performance and end up being foiled by various hijinks.
Yeah, I feel like the Monkees also kind of like took inspiration from that classic film.
Oh, for sure.
Well. What else have you been watching? Some TV?
Yes, I watched the first 4 episodes of His Dark Materials. I got them as screeners, and you can see my full review, spoiler-free, on slashfilm.com. And this is a show that I was really anticipating, but also was anxiously anticipating because the novels by Philip Pullman are near and dear to my heart. And I had been burned before by the 2007 feature film, The Golden Compass, directed by Chris Weitz, and it was a completely botched adaptation of Philip Pullman's books, which are kind of a inversion of Milton's Paradise Lost. And I have to say, HBO's His Dark Materials is fantastic. It does so much justice by Pullman's novels, and it approaches the story from a decidedly more mature, more serious perspective. The Golden Compass, when it came out in 2007, was very much part of that Harry Potter knockoff trend that would, come to theaters and subsequently disappear soon after. And this HBO series, His Dark Materials, which is named after the entire trilogy of novels, feels very much like a darker fantasy that's almost molded. I wouldn't say molded, but that comes in the wake of Game of Thrones. And I say that in that it doesn't imitate Game of Thrones necessarily, but it gives equal weight to both the character dramas and intrigue, as well as the more fantastical elements. And these fantastical elements I speak of are the talking animals, which you will see if you're not familiar with them. His Dark Materials takes place in a world in which humans' consciousness, their souls, basically take the form of an animal that they can talk with and which walk and travel alongside them outside of their body. And as children, that these animals can shapeshift into any sort of animals. They're called demons. But once they hit puberty, once they come of age, the demons to settle down into one singular form that will basically tell a person what kind of person that person is, like their personality. And so it's a nice little personality test, but it's a very like fantastical world that has a very like childish adventure in at least the first book, and that this first season will cover. But a lot of the later books and the storylines from those books are sort of seeded into this first season and attempt to make it a little bit more intriguing and dramatic and tense. And I was nervous about how the series would look because it's directed by Tom Hooper, who has a lot of Oscar nominations, but not necessarily ones that he would deserve, I guess you would say. He has a very like washed out sort of handheld, a lot of negative space style that I felt like wasn't fitting towards the world that Philip Pullman created. His world is just so rich and sumptuous. But
yeah, how many Dutch angles? How many unnecessary Dutch angles?
There's a lot of Dutch angles, and it bothered me. But he only directs the first 2 episodes, and once he gets his hand off of those, it it improves immensely, but he does kind of establish that house style. And there's a lot of shots where there's just so much negative space that you don't need it. But it does kind of wash out the show a little bit. But the performances make up for whatever visual stumbles that this series has, especially Daphne Keane, who plays Lyra, the young girl who comes into contact with this golden compass, this truth-telling device, and goes on a quest to rescue her friend from child kidnappers. She's great. Daphne Keane, you might recognize from Logan, as well as Ruth Wilson, who is just fantastic as the villain. She is amazing and just a dynamite to watch, and one of the best female TV villains I've seen in recent years. She's just so icy and fiery and vulnerable and savage and feral all at the same time, and I love her. So I'm really excited to see what lies beyond these first 4 episodes, which I absolutely adored, and I think that HBO is just 2 for 2 right now for their fall TV series.
HT, I need to know, how is hot air balloon cowboy Lin-Manuel Miranda?
So Lin-Manuel Miranda is playing like this swashbuckling aeronaut who flies a hot air balloon, and he gives this real theatrical performance, which I first you can't really take him seriously because it's so theatrical, but he kind of gives the comedic relief that the show doesn't really have until he appears. He has like this sort of buddy comedy dynamic going with both him and his demon, which is a hare named Hester, as well as with Daphne Keane. They have a really fun push-pull dynamic. So he's supposed to be this swashbuckling sort of gritty character, but I like that Lin-Manuel Miranda doesn't play into that entirely. He's just like, I'm theatrical and I know it, and it works. It works for the character a lot.
So something I've been thinking about recently, you mentioned like the Game of Thronesification in the show, and I've been noticing that a lot lately. So much so, like I feel like, I mentioned Dark Crystal, but I feel like from 2008 to the last 10 or so years, we had like the Dark Knight had like such a huge impact on our pop culture and the stories, how stories were told, and like from what kind of tone and like a dark vision, and they were always trying to capture that and didn't quite do that. And I feel like now we're in the post Dark Knight-ification of pop culture. We're now in the Game of Thrones-ification of pop culture. I wanted to hear, since what your thoughts were on that.
I have mixed feelings about it because I know that Amazon right now is kind of trying to create their own Game of Thrones with Lord of the Rings, which is a series that I feel like doesn't deserve or need the Game of Thrones treatment. It's a high fantasy series that is high fantasy to the fullest and doesn't need to be gritified or grounded in any way that that Game of Thrones did. So I think it's interesting that his Dark Materials kind of doesn't completely take the Game of Thrones influence in terms of just trying to be dark and gritty and serious, but it does feel like it is slightly influenced by it because of just how drastically different it is from like the original 2007 film. So I do like the idea that Game of Thrones has made fantasy a credited or credible genre.
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling it outside of like even fantasy. Like, I know I only watched a few episodes of Star Trek Discovery. Jacob, you're a fan of that show, right?
I have a relationship with it, yes.
I feel like that show also took the Game of Thronesification with like the Klingon, how they dealt with the Klingons in that series, or at least the episodes I saw. Like, are you feeling this in your pop culture as well?
Oh yeah, Game of Thrones is the thing. Like, you were incredibly spot on with your Dark Knight comparison, because it, like, everything chased Dark Knight. Like, even James Bond chased Dark Knight with Skyfall. It just that everybody wants to try to get that lightning in the bottle, and Game of Thrones was, an era-defining piece of pop culture, and we're going to be seeing it until the next era-defining piece of pop culture comes around to supplant it. And I like Game of Thrones a lot, as listeners know. I am not looking forward to 10 years of people like really trying to recapture that with stuff that probably should not be built around it.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see. My hope, my hope is that people will use this opportunity to make like mature, complex genre storytelling for adults, as opposed to thinking just backstabbing and nudity is the key to what made that show popular.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been eating. Like I mentioned earlier, I went to Galaxy's Edge this week in Disneyland, which I went last Wednesday, a week ago, which I just found out because of news reports that there was someone with measles was there that day. So now I got to worry about that. But aside from that, I did go there to experience the new food. They rolled out some new food in Batuu that included at Ronto's Roasters. They have this thing called the Ronto Wrap. They have introduced a new version of that called the Ronto-less Ronto Wrap, which is a meatless version of it. And it almost tastes like the meat inside it. Like it has some like toppings, like kimchi and stuff. It tastes almost like the meat from a dumpling. And it I could not tell. If you told me this was some kind of meat, I would believe you. Like it does not. I'm so surprised at the meatless options and how good they are. We tried a bunch of stuff. I'll put a link to the video in the show notes. But the other winner that we tried was Katsaka's Kettle, which usually has this thing called Outpost Mix, which is this colorful popcorn. They now have added this chocolate popcorn, which is chocolate and chocolate salted. The salt is red salt from the planet Crate, which kind of drives me crazy because if you've seen The Last Jedi, the surface area, the white surface, is actually the salt, and the red is actually a mineral beneath the surface that is not salt. And the fact that Galaxy's Edge has gotten this wrong annoys me in my canon obsessed person. And I've looked online, and that is true. It's actually canon that the red is like this other substance that's not salt. Anyways,
Peter, this really bothers me too. Like you said this, and like I felt a swell of weird anger in me. I can't quite define.
Like, they have a Lucasfilm story group. It's some of which I'm friends with. I don't know. I'm wondering like what went into that decision, because that seems like it's a canon. I don't know. Like, did Disney even consult them on this?
It's so like. It would have taken them 5 minutes to check this. They're a multi-billion-dollar organization. They spent how much money on Galaxy's Edge and they can't check the color of thick salt? Peter, I'm angry. I'm mad about this. My immersion is broken.
Well, anyways, you can watch our video. I did not realize this when I was eating it because I was so much enjoying it. So I only realized this after the fact. But you can watch our video. I'll put that in the show notes. Jacob, what have you been eating this week?
I ate around Estes Park a bit. You know, it's a small town, decent food. The Stanley Hotel's restaurant, very mediocre for the prices that they are charging you to eat there. Can't recommend that you eat at the Stanley Hotel if you stay there. But the bar is quite something. They have the largest whiskey collection in Colorado, but I didn't drink much whiskey because they have a drink there called the Red Rum Punch, leaning heavily onto the Shining references. And Red Rum Punch is essentially a rum punch that they use I think it was blackberry and raspberry liqueur to create, like, you know, the actual dark blood color, so like you're drinking blood. And this stuff was everywhere. Like, everybody was drinking Red Rum Punches. It's like their signature drink, I think. And every open bar, every WB event over the trip had them serving Red Rum Punch. I drank way too much of it. And at one point at the Shining Ball, I drank 10 of them. And I went up back to my hotel room and vomited for about 5 minutes, and it all looked like blood. And it was one of the worst moments of the entire trip. So I recommend the Red Rum Punch. Just don't drink 10 of them.
I mean, I think that's life advice in general, right?
Yeah.
Everything in moderation.
Look, Dr. Sleep, the book and the movie, is about a recovering alcoholic who reaches his low and has to rise up to, like, you know.
Wait a second. So you're saying this decision was method?
Yeah,
this was research for your Mike Flanagan interview.
It is me understanding where Dan Torrance is at the start of his story. Clearly.
Okay, then. What have you been playing this week, Jacob?
I was at a lot of airports and a lot of shuttles from airports to remote mountain towns and on planes. So I played Resident Evil 4 on Nintendo Switch, and Resident Evil 4 was, back in the day, it was the game. Like, I played it so many times on PlayStation 4. It was originally a GameCube game in 2004. And this was the Resident Evil game that, like, for better or worse, pushed the series into action territory and kind of left horror behind. The series has since come back to horror. It's got looped back around, but it's very much this horror-tinged action game. And man, back in the day, it was like the best looking game, the best playing game. It was so cool. And the fact that I'm now playing it portably on an airplane on a Nintendo Switch is insane. Like, if you told me back 2004, hey, this game will soon, in 15 years, you can play it in your hand. I'm like, no, you're a liar. There's no such thing as a better looking game than Resident Evil 4. It's the best game of all time. All these years later, it's interesting because the controls are now super clunky. It still looks surprisingly good, but it still looks like a game came out in the 2000s. It is super cheesy cornball and chauvinist towards female characters. But you know what? Resident Evil 4 is still really good. I can't recommend it to somebody who has never played it before. Like, if you're like a brand new gamer or a younger gamer who is used to quality of life stuff, like controls that don't feel counterintuitive or story that isn't total garbage, don't play Resident Evil 4. But if you're like me and remember it fondly and want that nostalgia kick, I think the Nintendo Switch portably is the best way to play this game now.
Okay, then. So don't or do play Resident Evil 4. You heard it from Jacob. And also don't drink 10 of that thing. So
yeah, don't drink 10 of that thing. Yeah, but you know what? If you want some Resident Evil in your life, Resident Evil 2 Remake is straight up incredible. And if they remade Resident Evil 4 in that style and fixed all the broken stuff, I would buy that game again for like the third time. So make that happen, Capcom.
So you're basically saying if they made the thing that you like that is not perfect, then people would like it.
Peter, I'm not exaggerating when I say Resident Evil 2 Remake is one of the best games I've ever played. It takes a very old game and rebuilds it from the ground up in a way that feels like how it always should have been. So Capcom, I have bought Resident Evil 4 3 times or so over the years for various platforms. I will rebuy it again if you remake it. So put that money where your mouth is with all your Resident Evil remake talks, as we know it's coming. You know Resident Evil 3 remake's coming next. So do 4 after that. I'll buy them all, damn it.
I'm sure someone from Capcom has been listening for the entire hour and a half of this show and is taking notes as you speak, Jacob.
They better be, because I know best.
Yes. Anyways, you can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, and returns at peter@slashfilm.com. And please rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, Peter?
Peter's not here.
Am I correct in remembering that? Did you record a water cooler without me last week? Or was that? I don't remember.
I believe we did. Didn't we?
We did?
No, you were...
No.
Wait. Hold on.
We have to investigate. We don't remember what we did anymore.
I asked because I need to know if I was on last week's water cooler or not, because my clock's thrown off. I need to know if I need to do double jokes today or not.
No, you were totally there, Jacob.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
remember now. Yeah.
Okay. So
No double jokes. Definitely
The
not.
Gargantuan Book of Insult, Offense, and Infrontery by Louis A. Safian is now open in front of me to the entertainers
By the way,
section.
we should mention that last week you did read from a website, which
That's right.
after the fact, after you read these horrible jokes, we realized was racist and sexist.
Yes, if you scroll down far enough to the horrible joke website I found, there were some user-submitted jokes at the very bottom that went to some dark places, so you should not follow that URL.
So now I feel bad that we even gave it any promotion at all, but I guess we're also giving promotion to Louis A. Safian.
Look, Louis A. Safian is many things. He may not think highly of women. He may think men are scoundrels. He may think we're all worthless. But you know what? His jokes are mostly clean.
I think they're a little sexist. Don't they have like a tinge of like women or like money grubbing?
There's been some of that.
Oh yeah, but you know what? Let's see if there's any sexism on page 278, the entertainers section.
Okay.
Hey Peter, the curtain rose in your performance at 8:30. The audience rose at 8:40.
So,
That was actually pretty good.
I don't get it. So wait, my
They
show
just-
was 10 minutes long?
I think the implication is that it's so bad that they gave up after 10 minutes, right?
The curtain rose on Peter's performance at 8:30. The audience rose at 8:40.
My favorite thing is when you repeat these jokes, Jacob.
Yep.
HT, last night's performance proved beyond doubt that you're going to go far. The audience chased you 5 miles.
Oh my.
But that's because they like her.
Yeah, what if they're fans?
Hard day's night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, Ben, he's such a ham, he'd feel at home between 2 slices of bread.
That's how I sleep at night.
Chris, he claims he sings by ear. Unfortunately, that's the way his audience listens.
What? How else would they listen?
I really don't understand that one.
Chris
Yeah, me
claims he sings by ear. Unfortunately, that's the way his audience listens.
Oh, okay, I get it.
It's a good one. These are actually really good jokes. I like this page.
Do you want to send one to Brad, who is not here? He's out sick.
Yeah, Brad is sick. Well, the trouble with Brad... wait, no, that's not a good one. Wait,
The other 4 ones were good?
yeah. I was trying to read this joke, then I realized I didn't get it halfway through reading it. I need to understand it before I read it.
Wait, you understand all the jokes you read?
Yes, always. I'm very smart, Peter. All right, here we go. Brad's act goes over like a pregnant woman doing a pole vault.
Oh my.
What an image.